So U.S.-Korea relations are a little bit complicated. It's a very complicated, actually. And it has a very multifaceted relationship. You cannot just simply say, oh, they are allies. Ally relationship also can be complicated too, but there is more to that. And I'm gonna try to do that with you tonight. So the first contact was made in, I'm gonna go back to 1800s. 1866, General Sherman came at a gunpoint, said, open up, we want to trade with you. Before that, actually French came. And then, so Korea had to go through a war. You know, it's a time of East Asian country, the East Asia and largely South Asia, there was a Western imperialist advances into that region, right? So you have to understand it into a larger geopolitical, advances of the Western countries coming in. Not only the U.S. at the time, but it was Britain, Spain, France. They were all trying to go into these unknown territories and claim it as their own, and subjugate dominate the trade, or they were trying to play the dominance and power game among these established countries. So they came, and then there was a war. So to retaliate, 5 years later or 6 years later, they came again, and then killed the entire soldiers that was facing 650. It's a small island also. It was called reported as a Korea expedition. In Korea, we learned it as a Pampa massacre. That, without any provocation by Koreans, these foreign ships came and then started to, try to come in and attack. So this is how we began our relationship. But, it was okay for the U.S. to do so in Japan. It's the same thing. It's not like Korea was only target. They went to Japan and did it in 1853, 7, and it was received. They lost, and then it led to Meiji Restoration. So then, Japan was quickly becoming westernized, and they were building the factories, and they sent delegations out to U.S. U.S. sent there was an exchange of the knowledge. It was good. In Korea, because of the internal problems and internal foreign relations were having some rocky points at the time, they didn't want to open up. So then we got the nickname of a hermit kingdom, because we wanted not to communicate. But that was only then, Anyway, so, oh yeah, I already talked about this. So, at the time, in the early 19th century, late 19th century and the early 20th centuries, Korea, there were so many foreign troops and forces and missionaries and, the Catholic priests and Baptist missionaries, and everyone was in Korea. And people were trying to make adjustment. And it's kind of hard because, it's a very different culture, very different language, and very different customs, and maybe the people who were outside thought that Koreans are really uncivilized. Anyway, because they thought the missionaries with the good intentions, I'm sure, they thought that maybe let's send them to the U.S. and have them work there and make a better life and more money. But anyway, they sent about 7,000 laborers, workers, the plantation workers were sent from South Korea from Korea, in general, the national Korea. It was known as a Joseon at the time. But the Daschler who were receiving party, he was a representative of Hawaiian Sugar Planters Association. And then they were already having a problems first with the Chinese laborers. And then the next influx was the Japanese workers, farm workers. And because the working conditions were so bad that they were trying to have a strike. So to break the strike, they thought, okay, let's bring another group of people in. And that's the Korea. So that's how the Korean immigration to the U.S. began. And that's a lot of the Korean Americans refer to January 13, 1903 as the beginning of our immigration into the U.S. And that's the picture. Well, wherever, at the time, they thought they are just temporarily here and then they will go back to Korea. So they built their own school, and this is the school picnic picture. Anyway, another one that the 1905 is important is that, so as I said, there is the Soviet Union, the Russians were in South Korea, Chinese army were in Korea, Germans, British, Japanese, and the US. So the US and Japan thought that the Chinese and Russians are coming down is a little bit too much of a threat. So let's make a pact and let's trade. So they sort of traded between Philippines and Korea. So then Japan said, okay, I respect your control in the Philippines. Instead, keep your hands off of Korea. It's us. So then they kind of traded their colonies. And that's called the Taft and Katsura Memorandum. And in South Korea, this is really important. Like, you learn in the high school. When I came here and talked to people didn't know about this at all. And I was like, why is that? Why? So that's like the colonization of Japan in Korea was under the approval of the U.S. is I guess what I'm trying to say. The U.S. knew about it, and they kind of promoted so that Japan would not come out to Philippines. It's a trade between Japan and the U.S. They said, okay, you take Korea, I take Philippines, So a whole another story about the colonization period. A lot of people think that just because the Japan surrendered after the dropping of the atomic bombs, that Korea automatically gained liberation. And if you say that, they will be met with the fury and wrath on the South Korean or North Korean for the same reason. Because approximately half of the population died during that period, trying to, as a freedom fighters or independence fighters. They were workers who were sabotaging and doing the strike. There was an effort, serious effort made by the Koreans for 36 years to try to gain their own independence. And then all of a sudden the World War II ended and Koreans were liberated. Before Korea was liberated, though, the U.S. was already at the time, 1945, were going into doing this anti-communist campaign. The Soviet Union was getting larger, and U.S. is, from the standpoint of the U.S. as a country, they were really trying to minimize or isolate already of the Soviet Union. So there was a conference in Potsdam, and they talked about how to divide. So to disarm the Japanese soldiers in Korean Peninsula, how can we divide up? The US did not make an entry yet into the war nearby the Korean Peninsula. So they had two colonels make suggest divide up Korea, and surprisingly, even to the U.S., they agreed. Soviet agreed to it because Soviet was not really interested in expanding to, expanding down into the East Asia or East Asia yet. And that 38th parallel is very similar to the demarcation line right now. And that, unfortunately, no Koreans took a part of it, or no Koreans knew about this arbitrary line across the 38th parallel. Okay, so after 1 month later, about 3 weeks later, Korea was liberated, officially liberated. The U.S. enters Korea. So from the August 15, 1945 is the Liberation Day. Everyone kind of celebrates. Within that 2 weeks, you will notice that the Committee for the Preparation of Korea Independence was formed as a national level. And then 145 branches in 13 provinces, entire Korean Peninsula, were established during that same period. So you can see that from the long before, people were organizing and they were already communicating. They were getting ready to take the land over, take the control. They were so eager to build a newer, better society, so to speak. But unfortunately, General Hodge at the time heard from the Japanese officers who were controlling that colonized land in Korean Peninsula that Koreans tend to be communist friendly, and they are more of they are orienting themselves to the socialist. Because a lot of people, at the time we were feudal society, so the people were tied into the land. If you don't have a land, then you are really poor. So then, socialist ideas and ideals and this text were really a kind of a new thing for masses of Koreans. And of course, the socialist, the egalitarian ways of possession, really people kind of tend to wanted to try that out. And that's why I guess there is a reason. I guess General Hodge may have been right. It potentially communist friendly, and then decided to forcibly disbanded all these committees. So eventually it got disbanded. But then instead, so then they turned who they are going to pick as a people who they are going to entrust with the power is the people who are educated, elites, and then landowners, who happen to be also collaborators with the Japanese under the Japanese colonization. And this is the notes is a really illuminating. The most encouraging single factor in the political situation in Korea is the presence of several hundred conservatives among the older and better educated Koreans. Although many of them served the Japanese, that stigma ought eventually to disappear, is what they thought. That stigma is still residing in people's mind, and it brings out such an, unfortunately, resentment too. Conservative elites and landowners, the U.S. favored and exempted from punishment, were for good reasons extremely unpopular with most Koreans. It directly undermined the Korean people's wish for justice, liberation, and social change. So this direct intervention of giving the power to ex-Japanese collaborators, and accordingly, the people who are in the power now still are the descendants of the Japanese collaborators, made most Koreans very bitter and on not trusting the people in power or the government. And that's one significant step that U.S. took in the wrong direction in Korean modern history. So anyway, as you most know, the Sigmund Rhee, because Hutch thought, oh, he's from the U.S., he was educated in Princeton, let's make him the president. So the Sigmund Rhee became the president and then became a dictator, and he didn't step down from the presidency for 3 long terms that he designated. And because he's a very strongly anti-communist, the first president, Sigmund Rhee, unfortunately I share the same name, same last name. Maybe my ancestor, I don't know what my ancestors, sorry. But, so people had some doubts. A lot of people had some doubts about, is the U.S. true liberators and freedom fighters as they say they are, or is it just a selfish superpower who does not know anything about history? Maybe somebody should go and tell them. So then, people sent a lot of times people sent delegations to the U.S. just to tell the truth. No, these people are not to be, trusted. Comparatively speaking, in the North, they were able to do the land reform. They were able, because during the war, actually, a lot of landowners came down. Oh, okay. So, okay, let's just skip that. That's important, but that's North Korea. It's a fight between South Korea and North Korea up until 1987. It's about legitimacy. Who's really representing the Korean interest? Or who's keeping the Korean pride? Those things may not be really important in our economic life, but in Korea, because it's the colonization and the war and the domination of the superpower is so new still that pride aspects and legitimacy aspect plays a really important role when you are dealing between South Korea and North Korea relations. They still consider themselves as a one country. In the U.S. and in the recent poll says that South Koreans do not want a reunification. The poll, you have to always see the sample. Who are they sampling? If they are only sampling the people who are in their 20s and 30s, who grew up under the conservative administration, the recent 10 years of Lee Myung-bak and Park Geun-hye, then they tend to say, well, economic betterness is the most important. If my job is at stake, why do we have to worry about the reunification? It's not the most urgent thing. But if you go over that generation, 30, over 30, and if you sample only them, majority of the people, usually over 67%, are in favor of reunification without giving a precondition. So in the next time, we'll talk about other things too. So anyway, I want to also point out that, to support that theory of U.S. hegemony in Korean Peninsula is the thing that U.S. is seeking, is that the peacetime operation control was transferred to South Korea in 1994, even after the Olympics. That's, and as I said, so what justifies this maintenance of the control of the military? Another thing that you have to think with this military control is, so then whenever there was a massacre of the dictator, of the military on the citizens or civilians, the US had an idea or the information about it. Because in order to move the military, the troops from one location to the other location, there has to be a prior authorization. So the coup, the military actions in Gwangju massacre, in Busan massacre, all these massacres where the military killed the civilians, the US is not free of the blame, unfortunately, because US had the control. The command was under the US's hand. So it's not like, the dictators were only there and doing their own thing. Dictator had a full support of the US government because they were, they were friendly to the US interest and friendly to the US. And people kind of knew about that. The colonized, I'm not sure if you also read about the colonized mind, that there is this envy and fear. Envy and fear at the same time, right? There is a fear and there is a hate, but then there is an envy and there is a jealousy that they want to be like, It's like a Stockholm syndrome, or that's how the workings are working. So in South Koreans, yesterday, the Korean National Assembly got together. They were going to issue a statement under the name of the National Assembly, which is a Congress. They wanted to express that their unhappiness about the Trump's remark about tariff, 50% increase in the tariff of the metal trade. And then the Conservative Party disagreed with issuing the statement because they were worried. Officially, they said what they worried about was the retaliation from the U.S. could be greater. They would be more, it could annoy them more, so that we can get bigger retaliation. And maybe the current administration is doing something wrong, so the U.S. is trying to punish, is the logic, the discussion. And then people, a lot of news commentators were like, why, as a nation to nation, if, the agreement was upturned, why couldn't we say something about it? Why do we have to worry about bigger retaliations if it's a partnership, So the people who are coming out with a American flag, the star and the stripe, is trying to appease the U.S. or showing the U.S. that there are people and support, so that don't. Yeah.
Make sense. No. What?
So they are trying to appease them so that there will be no retaliation. There will be no military action. There will be no military coming to get them eventually. It's a fear of persecution. South Korea had also suffered more than 30 years of military dictatorship under, as a police state as well, right? Under Park Chung-hee and under Chun Doo-hwan and up to Roh Tae-woo. So that could be our mentality, I think. Otherwise, I would not be able to explain why people are coming out with an American flag. The national security law is another thing the U.S. also supported. 1948, we enacted the infamous national security law. And under November to, in only within the period of 6 months, less than 6 months, 60,000 people were arrested, incarcerated, tortured, and executed. The national security law is like a counter-terrorist act. It's not. Yeah, yes.
We could have had Juyeon for the entire evening.
I know.
So I'm sorry to cut you off. Maybe we'll leave a little of the rest for the Q&A.
Yeah. We should. I'm just gonna say one thing, is that what I was trying to get at was well, I also want to talk about that people's resistance and movement, but you know, I'm sure there will be another opportunities and you can hear all about it. It's just that, you know, you also, whenever you're questioning about, is North Korea trustworthy? You always have to think, South Koreans are saying, is US trustworthy this time? Are they gonna keep their bargain this time? You know, that's not only the North Korea. Also, South Koreans are saying the same thing. And that's the question that, you know, you also have to place yourselves onto the other person's shoe. Okay. Sorry for the
So, Bill?
Yes.
Thank you so much. We'll have time for Q&A afterwards, and you're going to be able to speak with people as well, and we'll hopefully have you come back for more. I can see you have like a lot more to share with us, so thank you so much.